So specifically, I'm going to talk about nitrate and about the units of nitrate, because a lot of folks out there, including yours truly, are confused or used to be confused on the units that are used to measure nitrate that is dissolved in the water. And so and many of you, particularly in the ornamental industry, use so-called dosatrons or some kind of fertilizer injector. How many of you inject liquid fertilizer in your irrigation water? I see hands coming up. So how do you know that that machine, that thing is actually injecting the fertilizer at the rate that you think it is? Yes, sir.
We don't care because we're putting it on the soil, and we do it very frequently, and I just want to take this much fertilizer and put it out on this much soil at that particular time. So the proportion or the ratio of fertilizer to water doesn't interest me.
Okay, we don't care. It's a big Any other answers? Anybody cares around here? Well, so in the ornamental industry, unfortunately, we will be forced to care, and I mean that as a joke, but the water quality regulators these days don't have a lot of sense of humor, let's put it that way, and the regulations are getting more and more stringent, and so growers out there will be forced to be more aware of management, particularly around nitrogen and phosphorus, that, as we know, are those nutrients that have strong effects on the environment and eutrophication and all that kind of stuff. So today, I want to talk a little bit about nitrate and how to measure it in the irrigation water in your liquid feed. So then that way you can answer the question, am I really applying the 150 ppm of nitrogen that Dr. Merhaut told me I should apply when I went to the workshop? Maybe I think I'm applying 150, but actually I'm applying 50. That's why my plants don't grow as much as they should. Or maybe I'm applying 250, and then my runoff goes into the creek, and now some county or some water quality regional board inspector is gonna get really angry at me. And so there I put a picture of some of these strips that we will play with in a minute, that are one of the methods that you can use to measure nitrate in the water. And this is a simple colorimetric method that you compare with those colors. Any questions so far? Everybody knows what we're doing? All right. So, how many of you know what's the EPA limit for nitrate in drinking water? Okay. How many of you are aware that there is an institution in the United States called EPA? Okay, we're on the right track. How many of you know that in some rural areas in California, like the Salinas Valley or the Central Valley, there are some rural communities where high nitrates in the groundwater, they're being impacted. These folks, they cannot drink any more water from their tap water in their houses. Are you aware of this? Like, it's kind of an environmental problem that also becomes kind of a social problem, right? So why is that a problem? Why you cannot drink water with a lot of nitrates in it? Who knows? Yes, sir.
Blue baby syndrome?
All right, blue baby syndrome. What does that mean?
Well, I think that it has to do with the oxygen in the blood of the infant.
So it's some nasty thing, right? Who wants to see their baby all blue because their red cells or their hemoglobins or something is interacting with the water they drank, right? I gave my baby some water and now it's all blue. So this is some serious stuff. I'm not joking, man. This is some serious stuff, right? So now the EPA says, okay, we don't allow that the concentration of nitrate is more than this threshold, right? And once I was having a conversation and two guys were saying, were fighting. And one was saying, no, the EPA limit is 10 ppm. And the other one was saying, no, the EPA limit is 45 ppm. And they were fighting. And I'm like, guys, you are fine. You're telling the same story. You're just using different units. And a lot of regulations and the regional board and Rainbow Creek and the total maximum daily load and all that kind of stuff, they have thresholds. They tell us you cannot have more than 1 ppm of nitrogen in Rainbow Creek. That's why there is this big problem with Rainbow Creek and all the nurseries close to Rainbow Creek. Some of you may know. There are these thresholds, and that's why it's important that we know what we're talking about, right? So we can compare apples and oranges. So there are two units that are being used, and the first thing I want to say is that ppm or parts per million are, for all intents and purposes, the same as milligrams per liter. There is a tiny little difference because ppm is a volume per volume and milligrams liter is a weight per volume. But we're lucky because the density of water is 1 and so it cancels out. I say almost because it's not only water, it's water with some nitrate in it. And so the density is a tiny little higher than 1. But at low concentration of nitrate, the error is not very big. So at our concentrations, ppm and milligram liters are the same. Who's confused? Yes, sir. Question. Joke. Joke. Okay. So you will find these two units for nitrate. Nitrate, or NO3, and nitrate nitrogen, or nitrate -N, or NO3-N, or nitrate expressed as nitrogen. Can it get any more confusing than that? But luckily, we know that what the molecule of nitrate looks like is that nitrogen in the middle with 3 really heavy oxygens around it, right? That's why it's NO3. Everybody agrees? Okay, so now the problem comes with the conversion of these two units. So the first unit tells us the weight of the whole molecule. And the second unit tells us only the weight of that nitrogen within the molecule. So my ex-girlfriend really liked chicken. So she always asked me, baby, cook some chicken for me. And so I went to the grocery store and I looked up the recipe and I bought 1 pound of chicken. And then I removed the head, I removed the feathers, the bones, etc. The feathers, the bones, and the feet and the head and everything. And then only 0.22 pounds of chicken were left. And you can call it chicken meat, or you can call it chicken-M, I guess, or you can call it chicken expressed as meat. Right? And so then I used that for the recipe, and the recipe was a disaster, and that's why I don't have a girlfriend anymore. There are a couple of other reasons, mostly for the chicken. So the conversion factor is 1 pound of chicken. When you remove all that other weight of stuff that you don't need, it's only 0.22, about a fifth, between a fourth and a fifth. And so you can also say every 4.4 pounds of chicken, you make 1 pound of meat. So I'm not very smart. And so I need to make stupid examples for myself to go back to and think about. It's like, okay, this is the weight of the meat. It's not the meat. It's not the weight of the chicken. And so that's how I remember every time I see those units. That's how I remember which one is the big one and which one is the smallest one. So all things being equal, nitrate N or NO3N or nitrate nitrogen should have a smaller number, right? Because it's the weight of only that part of nitrogen within the big molecule. So nitrate is the chicken and nitrate N is the meat. Nitrate N should always be a smaller number. So of those two guys that were fighting about the EPA limit for the blue baby syndrome, etc., the EPA says there cannot be nitrate in water more than 10 ppm of nitrate N or 45 ppm of nitrate. Is everybody confused? Who's not confused? All right, we've got a couple of people that are not confused. How can I help those that are still confused? All right. So, and this is how I remember that the oxygens are. All right. Okay. So now, just to drive the point home, I want you to work. I want to make four groups, and each group is gonna get these two strip tests. So what you do, one of the strip tests gives you an answer in nitrate, and the other one gives you an answer in nitrate nitrogen. So I want you to work with your friends, and here's a lot of solution of water with Dr. Merhaut will help you. So you take one vial of water with nitrate in it, and you measure it with both strips. Yes,
Okay.
or two.
One or two.
But you want to work you want to group with the four people that are around you. So you get one strip from each of those bottles, from each of those, and you put it in the same water. Don't switch the water, or else you get confused.
I can make you work on that spot.
Or else you get confused.
Yeah.
What you get for us.
I know, right?
So everybody knows what we're doing. Everybody knows what we're doing. So if the strip test that says nitrate nitrogen gives you 5, what should the other one give you?
One more?
If nitrate nitrogen is 5, what nitrate should be? Higher. How many times? How many times higher? About 4, right? So it will be about 20. Okay, let's see if we can convince ourselves. Let's see if we can convince ourselves that these units. Okay, there is also other instruments. Now we're using these colorimetric strips, but they call them a semi-quantitative method, meaning that they give you like 5 or 6 colors, right? So maybe you have noticed when working with your colleagues that one says, well, it's more or less 30, and the other one says, well, it looks like more of a 40 to me, right? So there is some amount of personal interpretation that's not what we like, right? So a way to go around this is buying that thing that is called the reflectometer. That basically is an electronic eye that looks at that color and tells you a number associated with that color. The problem is that that machine costs $1,000. So it's not exactly the most accessible thing in the world. Another way to do it, now these days there's an app for everything, and so you can buy that card that costs $70, and then you put your strip on the card, and then you take a picture, and your phone uses all those colors there to as a reference, says, okay, if this is that color, this must be that color, and then gives you a number for your color. So it's a way, again, to standardize it. And this is me taking a picture with the app, so that the app will give me the number. Another better method is using these Horiba machines. These are electrode-based machines, and you can try. I'm gonna pass it around the various groups. You can pour a little bit of water in these cuvettes, and it will give you a number. And this particular machine gives you unit of nitrate. So again, it's the chicken, it's the large number, right? So then you will have to divide by 4 if you're looking for your nitrogen. So I'm gonna pass it around, and you can pour some of the water that you have in your vials in that cuvette and see what number you get. And it should be comparable with what you get from the colorimetric strips. Yes,
I
sir.
have a question.
Yes, sir.
So, have you used the nitrate meter
Okay.
on that,
That's what I was
that one right there, the green one? Have you used that one?
If I have used it, yes, I use it all the
Is
time.
this pretty consistent for you?
Is it stable?
Not extremely,
Okay.
not extremely, but I find that it's comparable to the strips.
Okay.
How much is that?
That costs about $400, $350. Finally, there is this other instrument here that is this big bad boy here. And what it does is called a spectrophotometer. So basically, you take a sample of water and you put it in one of these cuvettes, and you see it's a little pinkish. So you add a reagent that reacts with the nitrate. This is a little sachet that comes with the instrument, and there's this reagent in it. And there is some vanadium in it, there is some cadmium, there is some nasty chemical that makes this pink color. And so first you put your water before the reagent, you put it in the machine, and the machine takes the measurement. It's the 0. Then you add the reagent, it becomes pink, you measure it again. And by the difference, the machine tells you how much nitrate was in your water. And this is a more accurate method, but of course you spend more time, you have to add the reagent, you have to wait, there's a little bit of wet chemistry involved. Yes, sir?
What do you do with that sample when you're done with it? Is that a problem?
I just flush it down the toilet. So it goes to the water treatment facility, and somebody will take care of it.
So in the lab systems, we use that measurement a lot on an automated system, and they're working on a more green method. It has less of that problem with waste. So when you're doing a lot of samples, it becomes not a problem anymore, and it doesn't become hazardous waste for us in the lab because we have so much of it.
And finally, since we like options, Dr. Oki here is gonna tell us how to use this other instrument that is our favorite, because it seems to be the most.
Yeah, so how I got to learn this one is because back in the 80s, our nursery was cited for nitrate pollution.
Ouch.
Yeah. And so we had to start monitoring our water. You have a reference over this. So the way this works is pretty much just like the previous one that Gerry mentioned. And what you do is put the thing across the. So there's two water sample cuvettes. You put your water sample in both of them. In one of the cuvettes, would be this middle one. You put the reagent in, and you have to shake it for I can't remember how long, a minute or so, and it creates the color. And you put it back in here, And what has this calibrated color wheel. And when you put the whole thing together, you put this up to the light. You can see this side is a little bit dark, and that's because of the color wheel. And so what you do is you turn the color wheel until the colors match. And then you read the number off of the meter. These are really simple. It's essentially the spectrophotometer with your eye. And because it's using your blank water sample without the reagent and the one with the reactive, with color change in it, and you're putting it up to the same light, and your eye is actually pretty accurate in matching the two values, and then you can read the number off of here. It's pretty accurate. We tested this against a spectrophotometer, and it's pretty close. I would say within 5 to 10%. So that's pretty close. And then it's fast. It's a field thing. You don't have to have an instrument. Here, Jerry, how much was this? Do you remember?
I will say $200.
Yeah.
Including shipping and freight.
But you get all these. You can do this many tests. Yeah. There's 50 in here. Yeah.
What is it called again?
It's by Hach, H-A-C-H.
If you email me, I can tell you
Yeah.
where to buy.
This one is also by Hach, right?
That's Hannah.
This was Hannah. Yeah. But Hach is known for their instruments that measure water quality and other things. There's a whole series of instruments, including this one, for measuring water quality. And they do have spectrophotometers, field spectrophotometers like this as well, and lab grade ones, of course. And of course, the more precise you get, the more money it costs. Right? But this one's really good. We used this one for many years, and it was pretty reliable. The color wheel is calibrated. It's a standard color set, and it does degrade if you keep using it out in the sun. So you have to, it has an expiration date on it, so you have to keep buying them if you use it for a long period of time. But this was also really good. And like I said, you take this out in the field, put it in your water samples, and then like 5 minutes you got a reading.
How long has it been for? The reagent, how long has it been for once it's made into a solution?
Once it's in solution, I don't know. But it doesn't take long to take. It's stable longer than it takes you to make the reading. Much longer than it takes you. Oh, sure, you have to do one each time because your standard, the one that you're comparing it to is different, right? Exactly. So every time you go to another place in the property, you have to fill both of these because the standard what you're comparing it to might be different. Right? Okay? Yep.
How'd you fix the runoff problem?
Well, that's a. How much time do you have? Well, we already knew that we were having a nitrate. This is back in the 80s. We already knew nitrate was going to be an issue. Our nursery did liquid feed, so we knew we had high nitrates in it. We were studying different ways to scenarios how to capture and recycle water, because that's what we thought we would need to do. But we also thought if we make the irrigation more efficient, reduce the runoff volumes first. If you cut the runoff volume by half, then the reservoir could be half as big, the pump's half as large, etc. So we worked on irrigation efficiency first. Then we started working on the runoff issue. We were testing control release fertilizers and getting off the liquid feed. And when we converted 3/4 of the nursery to control release fertilizer, we were meeting drinking water quality standards in the runoff. So that meant that we could convert the entire nursery to control release fertilizers and use the liquid feed for custom feeds for different specific crops and still meet drinking water quality standards. So I'm left up here that we.
Don is gonna.
You can keep talking. So they're like, oh, thank God. Listen to him. And why doesn't he ever use his hands when he talks? That's just weird. Right? No, I would never say that you use your hands. He taught me how to say spaghetti. Spaghetti.
Very good.
Spaghetti. I taught him how to say sauerkraut. Okay, so irrigation one. We talked about in-house and we talked about the meters. Okay, please.
Gerry. It's not a pencil.
It's fancy on the computer.
It's fancy on the computer. So there are these different methods that he showed you with these portable meters on how to measure different things. And so, and we were talking about the nitrate meter and the sodium meters and how they are, you can use them and get an estimate, but you don't have to have all those meters if you don't want to. You can go with just an EC meter. And if you're keeping good records of electrical conductivity, you can pretty much answer everything when you keep data of what you're using. We'll talk about that. So, okay. So if you decide to send your irrigation water samples to an outside lab, you have to make sure you know what lab you're going to send it to, because as he said, and he's demonstrated to you, Dr. Spinelli demonstrated to you, there's different methods. There's colorimetric, there's electrodes, and even though they're all supposed to have the same number, they're slightly off. So if you go with, right, they're slightly off. So if you go with one lab and they do colorimetric, another lab might do electrode, and those numbers may be a little bit different. And so you have not too different, but enough that when you're looking at numbers repeatedly over time, you might be concerned about the differences. And the other thing is, not all labs are regulated. So you don't know how well your procedures are for making sure things are correct. And when you do send samples, make sure you have what are you going to analyze for? So how much volume do you need to check with the lab? And also some of the better labs are going to provide you with bottles that are going to be used and aren't going to contaminate the sample. Okay. So keep that in mind when you're sending me water samples. Media. So the other thing is labs may give recommendations on reports and feedback about your operations. I see what Waypoint did on theirs. I don't know about the other labs. If you change anything, if you change anything in your media, your water, if you change from groundwater to surface waters, you need to check your samples, and it's going to change things. The other thing is if you're not sure about the lab and you want to make sure that the lab is a reputable lab, you can send a couple samples, 2 or 3 of the same sample as blanks, and you collect a sample, mix it together as one sample, and then pull out 3 samples and send it, and have one sample labeled and the other 2 not, and see if they come back the same. And that way you kind of know that, oh, okay, yeah, you're okay. So that's one way of double checking if you're not sure about the lab. But again, stay with the lab that you're using when you finally get it, because for like the media especially, the extraction methods can be also different. So we're not only talking about the type of way of measuring it, but also how, with media, how you're extracting for your soils. There's different methods. So the type of extraction can be based on soil type, and they will use different methods depending on the soil type. And so when you get to media, that can make a big difference in what you end up with as the final result. So for media, you can do flame emission, which is where they put a sample and they put it through a flame. And the flame will produce a blue flame or a green flame or a red flame, and they can calibrate that to read what the concentration of that element is. So that's flame emission. Colorimetric is what Dr. Spinelli showed you with the portable one where it turned purple, and that shows you the amount of nitrate in the sample of cadmium. And then there's mass spectrometry. This one's probably the best method if a lab does this, because this will measure the molecular weight, and based on technology, it will give a measurement of the concentration of that element through mass spectrometry. So if you see that there are different methods of measuring it, so you're going to get different results. So stick with the lab. If you change labs, then you have to kind of realize that and see what methods they're using for the analysis. The planting media, when I talk about this all day, I've been talking about in the media, the nutrient retention. This is almost a hydroponic system when you're talking about bark and peat. They don't have a lot of adsorption of elements in them. So most things you put in there, the fertilizer and stuff, will usually pass through unless it's tied up in sawdust if you use sawdust. There's something called adsorption and absorption, which I'll talk about in a second. Media shrinkage. So when you use sawdust, sawdust breaks down quickly, and usually after about 6 months, you start seeing a loss of volume of your media, and that's about half now. So I take that as cutting your production 50% in half and increasing your costs 50% because now you have to buy this twice as much because you have less water holding capacity and you have to fertilize it more frequently because you have a small root volume. So it's a lose-lose situation. So make sure you keep that in mind when you have a media. If you have stuff like this, then you're going to have to, one way of rectifying that situation is use less sawdust types of wood products, use more bark products, and things that have a higher lignin content that won't break down. This would have to be taken out, and media would have to be put in the bottom of the container instead of the top, so to use from the down if you have to do that.
Do products with high tannins have any negative effects on the
So
growth?
there's different, like pine bark has hot tannins in it. It seems to work okay. There's questions about the eucalyptus and stuff, and you're extending, so you have something to see.
Eucalyptus, bark.
Primarily bark. Yeah, usually with high tannins and barks, they don't break down, and that helps.
But the tannins themselves don't have like
Not that I know of. Have you
negative.
heard of anything?
Yeah,
On what plant?
you can on,
Eucalyptus?
what's his name? I can't think of this guy's name. Ellie Cook. He has, Ellie Cook sold a lot of berry trees, different ornamentals and
Yeah.
orchard trees, and Bob Ludekins was a proponent of using coniferous barks in media because the berry trees, they cut roots, and he had a list of plants that they were sensitive to this phenolics and tannins. So, but it depends on the species.
You don't have access to that, is it?
He had done the studies himself. So.
So there are a lot of the southeast, they use a lot of pine bark from the pulp industry.
Maybe out here we use a lot of fir bark.
So it probably also becomes in the bark. There was always a question about eucalyptus.
I've been seeing some like houseplant soils with redwood bark. But
I've never heard of any problems with
tried it out.
Are you sure it's redwood or not fir?
Not 100%.
Yeah, fir is much more common than redwood out here.
Yeah, working on studies right now and doing different media sources and we're designing, suggesting different medias for with our blend, our fertilizer blends, so that you get an optimal result.
Yeah. So East Coast, West Coast are really different. West Coast is the fir, and then East Coast is slash pine and loblolly pine.
So you're basically saying that if you have a bark that's not breaking down, it's not going to tie up the nitrogen.
Correct.
But if it's like a wood chip,
redwood here.
but if it's a wood chip,
It's wood. Termites love wood, right?
And it has to do with the decomposition organisms, right? They're
it's not breaking
consuming a
down.
lot of
It's
nitrogen.
not binding up that
Right.
nitrogen. It is breaking down. Obviously.
Bark does break down, but it's more slow.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Water holding capacity, substrate flush. This is one we've been working with the grower on because they have a substrate blend that has about a water holding capacity of about 20%. And they just cannot keep the plants watered. And plus they have limited water source. So it's about the frequency of water. And so they have to, we recommended upping the water holding capacity of the media so that they don't have to water as much. Because most of it's running right through. You want a good water holding capacity. The trade-off is you reduce the oxygen content if it's too high. So that's where the numbers, why you wouldn't want to go higher, is because then you sacrifice oxygen availability in the media. But when you increase the water holding capacity and you do liquid feed, of course that holds the fertilizer, right? So it's all fertilizer in the system. Okay, if you're using peat moss was ubiquitous before core came along. Core came along and was stored in brackish waters, and so it was salty, so it kind of lost its flair from the get-go, and then they finally cleaned it up and now cores and used them. Oftentimes it's blended with peat because peat is more acidic, core is more neutral pH, so putting the two together, you get the water absorption of two materials. You have less of the hydrophobic nature of peat when it dries out. Corn, on the other hand, will be wet relatively easily without the peat, on the other hand, will repel water. It's hard to do wet once it's completely dry. Okay, let's see. Okay, absorption and adsorption properties. Hydrophobic and hydrophilic things. Hydrophilic is primarily just about everything except peat moss. Peat moss will become hydrophobic when it's dry. If it's moist, it's fine. And then once it dries out, it's a problem. When we talk about cation exchange capacity immediate as well, if it works. Maybe it's just tired. Cation exchange capacity. So that's the cation exchange capacity is the ability of a media to tie onto positively charged, negatively charged sites tying onto things like calcium and potassium. So something that has a high cation exchange capacity can bind those things. Clays are very good at that. This is an example of cation exchange capacity, and that's adsorption. So we have a sponge. I usually do a sponge test. And so what you do is you get a sponge and it can absorb water, but if it's all wet and you put it in the sand, it can adsorb sand particles on the outside, right? And that's how the soil particles are. So this is cation exchange capacity, the absorption of cations onto particles on the charged sites. And this is different products: sand, pine bark, core, vermiculite, and sphagnum peat. This is the cation exchange capacity, mill equivalents per liter. What's mill equivalents per liter? Mill equivalence is a measurement of number of charges that can be found in a liter of media. So you can see sand is very low. So we talked about a lot of nutrient deficiencies in sandy rich soils. That's because of really low cation exchange capacity. And then we go to pine bark. And guess what's going to change with the pine bark is the particle size. So that number can fluctuate a little bit based on coarse pine bark versus very fine pine bark. And then core has a low cation exchange capacity. And vermiculite has a very high cation exchange capacity. And then you get a sphagnum peat, and we have kind of the middle of the level cation exchange capacity. Yes?
Do you have any experience, or have you looked at, some people are really excited about biochar?
Yeah, I have.
Is that something?
So biochar is interesting. Yeah. And he asked about, what's your name again? Ari?
Yeah.
Okay. Asked about biochar. Is everyone familiar with biochar? Yes? You've heard of it or haven't heard of it? Okay, biochar is basically charred pieces of organic material, usually barks or something, pine or wood. And so when it's charred, it doesn't break down as much. And they've processed it in different ways, and they're still working on it. And what it is, it's like coal dust almost is what it looks like. Some are trying to get it into particle sizes so they don't break apart. And what the proponent is it tends to hold nutrients really well. And we did do some studies with biochar, and we found that it does have a binding capacity for even negatively charged ions. For negatively charged ions, which I'll show you in a second, that's unusual. So biochar does have an ability to bind negatively charged ions. The only problem with biochar, and it doesn't have any toxicity levels from what we measured, up to 40% in the medium. The problem with biochar currently is that it's very fine and dusty. So it's really hard to blend into products because it's so dusty. How do you do that without causing a problem? So that's the one thing. But we have used it and we found that it does work. But like core in the beginning, there still needs to be things done with it because it's not uniform. And when you have a product, you have to have uniformity for the industry to adopt it. And that's where it's lacking. And it comes and goes based on what's happening in the economy and carbon credits, because people can make biochar and you get these carbon credits. Well, we haven't heard about carbon credits since before the 2006 recession. So it's kind of where it's at right now. So who knows where it's going to go? But it does work, but it's hard to use. So this is the cation exchange capacity, and I don't know what the cation exchange capacity of biochar is. Now watch this. The anion exchange capacity is a little different. And the anion exchange capacity is the total amount of negatively charged ions the substrate can adsorb. So nitrates, phosphates, sulfates. If we could get something that had a good anion exchange capacity, you wouldn't have these leaching problems, right? Well, when you looked at the other graph and what the cation exchange capacity was for positively charged, we don't even have a graph for anion exchange capacity because it's so low, it's almost non-existent. So it's almost zero. And that's why we have these issues with nitrates leaching into the groundwater because they can't bind, they're negatively charged. And most soils don't have that ability. Substrate types. As I said earlier, in order to not provide slow release of nutrients, especially nitrogen, barks do not provide nitrogen or phosphorus that could actually tie up nutrients. The reason I put that in there is because some agencies wanted to regulate mulching because they felt it contributed to the nitrate leaching issue. And if anything, it probably mitigated some of it, right? So, but that if, for instance, nitrogen was in there, it would be a problem. So that was there for the regulators. Wood products like sawdust and ground pellets break down quickly and tie up nutrients, especially nitrogen. But they also cause media shrinkage, for lack of a better term. And then the other thing is rice hulls and shells will break down more slowly, and you'll see that especially in Northern California, you'll have more rice hulls probably up there. Do you have products up there with rice hulls? Oh, I know, right? Do you have products up there with rice hulls in it?
A few.
A few. So rice hulls are more lignin based, and so they break down slowly, okay? So it's the lignins that don't break down as quickly. So they will last about 7 years. So they're actually fairly long. Let me see.
It's better to get composted rice hulls because if you get fresh rice hulls, you still get seeds.
You'll get rice.
You'll get rice.
We do see these landscape projects, and you've got landscape architects that are always specking in, bringing in compost or whatever to put in the backfill around these plants and everything. Does that really do anything at all long term? Because it seems to me that if you're adding, I don't know, a gallon or a very small amount of this material in with all the backfill, and you're planting, say, a 24-inch box or whatever it may be, that it's really nothing more than to make them feel good, but it can add a lot of cost. And the same thing with adding like 10 or 15 pounds of gypsum. Is it really anything? It just doesn't seem like it makes any difference.
Gypsum depends on the soil type, and I haven't seen, like I said, I don't work with anybody where there's saline soils, and that's an issue. And gypsum clears up the the sodium absorption ratio and the permeability issue. With regards to the backfill thing, there's questions on that too. And it's all over the place.
But the UC recommendation for backfill is to not amend it.
I can speak to this
Oh, no,
as a
man.
landscape architect.
You can duke it out later.
Yeah, I mean, we don't need to get off on it too much, but landscape architects are known for overspecifying.
Yeah.
And it's a lot. We install all our own projects, so it's not an issue for us because we don't want to spec something that is unnecessary that we need to charge the client for. So it doesn't make sense. But for a lot of those projects, I think it comes down to liability. When the plant doesn't do well, they want to be able to point the finger and say, well, you didn't follow the spec.
So, and
That's just what I think is a part of it.
And there is just a
it's not
huge
based
problem.
on
Yeah,
science.
it's a big problem, I think, for the whole industry in terms of landscaping, because when you look at areas that are getting regraded and you're bringing in soil, I saw one property, and I bet you I could count 20 different colors of soil going into that field to fill that in, and then people wonder why this one's doing wrong, this one's not doing wrong. Oh my God, are you kidding me? And then the other issue I have is that when you build new homes, they bring in soil and compact it for the house stability, and then you go to buy plants, and you have somebody telling you, oh, it's a native plant, and it doesn't need any amendment because it's a native plant, and you're like, no, you don't understand. I have a new house, and I don't have native soil. I have God knows what, and you try to get that through people's heads, yeah, it gets me
Pretty complicated.
Yeah, it's very complicated. So,
Well, I just wonder sometimes it'd be better to put out perlite. If you're looking at drainage and some of those things, simply because you want some pore space. And of course, that doesn't fit a lot because it's synthetic.
it floats. So you have a lot of perlite that look like Pennsylvania.
Yeah, it would be showing up a lot.
It'd be blowing around.
Is that a hailstorm? What was that? Yeah. Pumice? I've used pumice, but I do French, but that's outside of this. Okay, so substrate types, inorganic amendments in substrate. Sand and silt help with drainage with smaller particle sizes may reduce drainage, right? So concrete is made from sand. So you gotta be careful what the makeup is. Clays in a container will move to the bottom of your pot. So if you use something with native soil and you use too much of it even, you'll end up having this clay bottom in the pot. It migrates from the top to the bottom. Vermiculite is a superheated mineral, excellent water holding capacity and aeration, but it's easily smashed. So it's really good in propagation when you're doing for the liners and stuff and transferring cuttings, but not as anything else. I saw a lady buying, she probably bought 8 huge bags of this time. Take a break? Okay, yeah, she had 8 bags of this stuff. I'm like, what are you doing? Are you propagating something? Goes, oh no, I'm putting in raised garden beds. And her gardener's like rolling his eyes. So yeah. And calcine clays are another one. And then sands, if they're too fine, like I said, they reduce drainage. Clays will help with contributing to CEC, but they usually percolate to the bottom of the container. So you want to take a little break? Okay, let's take a little break. 10 minutes. We're almost done.